So after much deliberation and study, I was trying to work out where can we place John 10, and I found a critical juncture, and it's in John 10 verses 39 to 40. And it says this: "Again they tried to seize Jesus, but he escaped their grasp." Verse 40, "Then Jesus went back across the Jordan to the place where John had been baptizing in the early days, and there he stayed." So here where we see the phrase back across the Jordan, or onto the other side of the Jordan River, or you could say beyond Jordan, it's the Greek phrase which is 𝗵ραν 𝗷𝗲𝗆. So this is a key phrase that actually lines up with the passage in Matthew. But we also find another clue, and it says it's where John had been baptizing in the early days. Now, Jesus had to flee because the religious leaders were picking up stones to try and kill him, because he just talked about the sheep and how no one can snatch them out of his hand, no one can snatch them out of the Father's hand, and that he and the Father are one. And so because that he was claiming to be God, they were trying to kill him, and so he had to elude their grasp and he had to run away for a time, and he went out across the Jordan to this place where John had been baptizing in the early days, beyond the Jordan, on the other side, just on the east bank there. So then we have this critical verse in Matthew 19 verse 1. First of all, we have part A, where it states that after Jesus had finished saying the things that he was saying in Matthew 18, he departed from Galilee. Now this is significant because he's never to return to Galilee. You never see it mentioned again. This is the final trip towards Jerusalem to die and rise again. And then part B of Matthew 19:1 states that after he departed from Galilee, he came into the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. And there you have the phrase again, beyond the Jordan, 𝗵ραν 𝗷𝗲𝗆. But then this time you have two other Greek words in front of beyond the Jordan, which is the region of Judea, or ħωρaion Iudaia. And so what this tells us is that the east bank of the Jordan, where Jesus has gone to stay for a while, is adjacent to the region of Judea. It's obviously not in Judea, because Judea is on the west side of the Jordan River, but it's directly adjacent to the region of Judea. And to confirm this fact, we can actually go to the parallel passage in Mark 10 verse 1. Now, Mark doesn't mention anything about Jesus departing Galilee specifically, but he does add one minor detail that is very important. He says this in verse 1. "Getting up, Jesus went from there to the region of Judea and beyond the Jordan." So we see there that Mark's added in the "and," because he went into the region of Judea and then across the Jordan and beyond to the other side on the east bank, but it is adjacent. This was indeed where John had been baptizing in the early days, and we can find this out by looking at John 1 verse 28. It says this: "These things took place in Bethany beyond the Jordan, where John was baptizing." So here we have the addition of a name of a place called Bethany. So the place is actually called Bethany beyond Jordan. And in our modern world today, this place is known as 𝗷𝗲𝗆𝗃. And you can actually go and visit this place today as a tourist destination. And this was actually the place where Jesus was baptized by John. But later on, Jesus and his disciples actually came along and began to water baptize in the Judean countryside. And so John decided to move north to Aenon near Salem, because there was plenty of water there as well. So this was in the Samaria/Galilee region of the Jordan River. So 𝗥𝗲𝗆𝗃 on the east and Samaria on the west. So this was upriver, due north, in between Judea and Galilee. So to confirm these facts, let's just read John chapter 3 verses 22 to 24. "After this, Jesus and his disciples went out into the Judean countryside, where he spent some time with them and baptized. At the very same time, John was also baptizing at Aenon near Salem, because there was plenty of water and reasonably high demand. People were still able to come to John for baptism, since he hadn't yet been thrown into prison." So now we're seeing some maps here, and you can see where John baptized Jesus, down south at Bethany beyond Jordan, almost adjacent to Jerusalem. And then we can also see where John moved further north after Jesus' disciples began to water baptize. Then came the statisticians the Pharisees employed to count the number of baptisms that both Jesus and John performed. And they did this even though John had already said to them in John chapter 3 that he didn't care whether Jesus overtook him or not. He actually said, it's my job to decrease and it's Jesus' job to increase. So John had no competitive spirit at all, but yet it didn't stop the Pharisees employing these statisticians to count the number of baptisms between the two. So now I'm going to read the passage that I synchronised together, John 4 verses 1 and 2 with John 3:22. It says this: Jesus realised that the Pharisees had employed statisticians to keep count of the baptisms that he and John performed. Bracket, although his disciples, not Jesus, did the actual baptising. Close bracket. They relayed the score and Jesus was ahead. Now what's interesting is that the Message translation actually says that by doing this, the Pharisees had actually turned Jesus and John into rivals in the eyes of the people. So what was Jesus' response to this? Here is the next part of the gospel synchronization. Not that this comparison was made for long, because when he found out this was taking place, Jesus moved away from the Judean countryside and stopped baptizing. So we see that after Jesus found out that they were counting the stats and making he and John into rivals, he actually left. He literally left and went to Galilee, and we never have any more record that Jesus ever baptized again after this. So we can conclude that in Matthew 19 verse 1, beyond the Jordan in the region of Judea is definitely 𝗥𝗲𝗋𝗲𝗃, Bethany beyond the Jordan. Because Matthew stated here that Jesus departed Galilee, and then Galilee is never mentioned again, we can also conclude that John 10 has to come after Luke 9:51. The verse that states that when Jesus realised it was time for him to ascend to heaven, he set out resolutely with his face fixed towards Jerusalem, never again to return to his homeland of Galilee.